You're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. I'm Liz Davey, and this series of shows is filmed in my yard in Norfolk. I have herbs and flowers, vegetables, and also a shade garden and a pond. And we'll visit each of these areas and see how things are progressing. It's late May, just before Memorial Day weekend, and things have finally started to pop. We've had a very cold and wet spring, but we had a nice warm day yesterday. Today is more seasonal, and yesterday you could almost watch the plants grow. It was 80 degrees and just a sunny day, and having had rain the night before and a little more last night, the plants, you can almost, as I said, see them just sprout up and grow. We've planted quite a few things in the herb garden where I am now that are more hardy, but it's time now that the temperatures are at 50 or around 50 at night to plant some of the more tender herbs in the herb garden. These are annuals, or they're perennials further south, but they're annuals for us. And I grow a variety of those because I like them and harvest them each year, but they will not stand up to winter. And one such plant here is lemon verbena. And I'll move this out of the way. And I'm going to put that in right here. And I'll put another one in a little more sun in my vegetable or flower garden, because I really like it and like to harvest the leaves. Again, we'll dig a nice hole for it, and this one has pretty good roots, but they haven't really become too circular in the container, which means it'll probably be okay as far as spreading out, which is what we want it to do. We'll plant that one. And it's next to a lime balm. I also have behind it a lemon balm, so this is kind of a little citrus section. This is lime thyme. But we're going to change that up a little by adding a Thai basil. And the Thai basil is a little spicier than your regular basil that you get in the supermarket. It's nice in Thai dishes and other spicier foods. I'm going to put that back here. And you seem to have found a nice rock. Not unusual in Norfolk. And that too has a good root structure. Not too circled. If you buy a plant that has really circular roots that have just gone around and around, you really need to break them up so that they will expand when you plant it. I'll leave the tag on this one until I'm able to get another tag to put on. You'll notice that many of these herbs already have tags that I've put on. This is orange mint, and I have the tags. I take them out in the winter because I do know where the herbs are. If you are not sure about identification of herbs, it's probably best to leave them. The next thing I'm going to plant is a chamomile, and this one is, I guess you can actually eat it, but I probably won't be eating it. I will use the flowers. And this has some roots that are expanded a little more, so we want to loosen those up. It isn't too bad, but it still needs to be loosened a little. We want the roots to spread out. And I'll put that one right here next between the French thyme and the lime thyme. And it will add a little variation. In foliage and color. And the next thing we need to do, as with all plants that are set in, is to water them well. And keep watering them until we're sure their roots have spread out. As far as picking in the herb garden goes, we can pick thyme. Certainly the sorrel is still okay. We have fennel now. Chives are still available. There's going to be blooming in a few weeks. This plant is sweet woodruff. Because of this cherry tree that decided not to be a dwarf after all, this area has gotten shady. Sweet woodruff makes a wonderful ground cover, and I've just added it to this area. It is an herb, and it is essential for making May wine, which is a drink served in Germany in May. It's a combination of wine and champagne and strawberries, and sweet woodruff is soaked in the wine to give it the flavor. It's a lovely little herb, and it makes a really nice little ground cover. The various mints are now ready, the lemon balm and lime balm. Sage, oregano can be picked, as well as tarragon, and pretty much everything that has come up you can take at least a little sprig of and use in the kitchen. We'll be adding a few more herbs. We'll water the rosemary that we added last time just to give it a little boost. And I have various mints in here. I have peppermint, spearmint, mint julep mint, chocolate mint, and orange mint. So they're kind of fun to use in baked goods as well as beverages. Nice to put in the iced tea, which we hope we have some iced tea season coming soon. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. The azaleas are now in bloom. I have white ones and pink ones. And not only are they nice in the garden, they're also nice to pick and bring in for a nice bouquet in the house. It's so nice to be able to come out and pick something from the garden to put in the house for a fresh bouquet. Again, the columbine are in bud here, but there's a plant I noted a couple years ago that I didn't have any later color in this area. So last year I planted an aster, which is right here, which is doing quite well. And at this time I'm going to put in an annual bulb, and it's time to put those in too. And this is a canna lily, and it is supposed to have red foliage. And so I'm going to plant that in this area. It will be fairly tall, but it should be in bloom in August and September. And I'll have the foliage, the red foliage here, the burgundy color foliage, if all goes as planned. So we pop that in the ground. We want to put it in about 4 to 6 inches with the bud eyes facing up. It has little buds on it that you can see. And I will put the tag in so that I don't decide to plant something else here, which is always a danger. If I see an empty spot, I'm likely to go ahead and plant something. And I'll use the mulch that was in the bag. And then we'll water that in as well. I've put other canna lilies along the back of the garden just to fill in and again add some color later in the season. I've been looking for the lily beetles on the lilies, those red terrible beetles. most of my lilies seem to be doing pretty well this year without any damage from those red beetles. I have picked off a few, and I do keep watch because they can really destroy lilies in a very short time. Moving down the flower garden, the late tulips are just finishing. This is a nectar garlic, and it's a bulb. It's in the onion family, and it has an interesting bloom, which will be out probably in a week or so. The baptisia has really sprung up, and that'll have a nice blue bloom. Again, it's nicely in bud. I do want to pinch off the non-tuck daisy. This will help it branch. I'll just take every spot on it and give it a pinch right down the middle. I'll do this with the chrysanthemums too. This is another late bloomer. Again, this garden lacked for late color, so the Montauk daisy will help with that, we hope, too. But this is called pinching back. And Montauk daisies will hopefully spread out and form new branching at the points where I pinched it. This is also done with chrysanthemums, which I'll do up a ways here in the garden. The daffodils are gone, the hyacinths are gone. The daylilies are coming up to kind of cover their foliage eventually. We leave the foliage, no braiding, no taking it out. It needs it for next year's blooms. The alliums are starting. I have a couple different kinds. The nice thing about alliums is the deer don't like them at all, so they're a pretty safe bet if you have deer in the area. You don't need to spray them. I do have some dwarf iris back here. It's kind of in the back, but it adds a little texture, and it's a dark purple. Artemisia is gray, and that will get quite a bit taller, so I'll need to probably put a support around that. I have purple allium as well as the white. They bloom in different seasons. Some of them bloom more in the summer, some of them bloom now. I have mostly ones that bloom at this time. A few late tulips left. This is a oriental poppy. Its foliage came up in the fall and kind of went down in the winter, came up again in the spring, and now it will bloom soon. It hasn't put up its buds yet. I have several of them, but then the foliage will die back. So I want to make sure I have something in the area that kind of covers the spot. Probably an annual plant of some sort. These are some of the later tulips, and they're just going now. We have a few late daffodils here and there as well. Roses are doing well. They've had a lot of water lately. With the fertilization we gave them last couple weeks ago, they're doing extremely well. This is a tree peony. It's different than the regular peony, and its blooms are just starting. They will be about dinner plate size when they come out. I have several colors of tree peonies in various places, and they are magnificent in bloom, and it's a nice foliage plant when they are not in bloom. Again, a few late daffodils, along with a few tulips. This one was a little oranger, pinker when it bloomed, and these are a nice little daffodil that I planted last year, and I'm really happy with it. It has yellow petals with kind of a pinkish apricot cup, and they've been very nice. They look really well with the pink tulip, with the pinkish cup. The smoke bush, I transplanted this last year. Where it wasn't doing a thing. It's kind of back here now, but it will get quite a bit taller. It needs to be pruned back a bit more, but it's started to take off. It seems to be happier in this location than it was a little further into the shade. These are English bluebells, and I have these both here and in the backyard. They kind of like the shade, but they also seem to like the rain that we've had lately, and they're doing well. This is lavender, which adds a nice gray foliage, but it also will have blue blooms later on. I tend to have a lot of blue plants because I do like them. This is a chrysanthemum, and again, we want to pinch out the growing tip to help it branch. And it also will keep it a little bit shorter. I'll do this about every 2 or 3 weeks. And it will help it branch out. We'll get rid of the dandelion while we're here. I have several chrysanthemums that have come back from prior years. And the pinching of them, you can pinch several other plants as well. Phlox and Shasta daisies will respond to pinching also. It will extend the bloom sometimes on them and also make them bushier. Up this way we have nothing quite in bloom yet except a little iris and things with a lot of promise for blooms in a couple weeks. Iris is just starting to form buds. I have purple iris, and also there's a white iris back here, and those will be blooming in a couple weeks, as long as we continue to get some sunny days. Also the peonies, the regular herbaceous peonies will be blooming. The tree peonies bloom a little earlier than the regular peonies that you may be used to. So I've been putting in a few new plants, particularly butterfly friendly plants, because I really enjoy the butterflies. And I put in a Culver's root and an ironweed, both of which are butterfly friendly, and were available at Garden in the Woods, or Native Plant Trust as it's now known. They have a lovely section of native plants that you can buy and put in your garden. Now let's move on to the vegetable garden. Here we are in the vegetable garden, vegetable and fruit I should say. I need to get the pea fence up, and I need to get it up fast because the peas are really starting to climb. And I'll put the net over the poles and fasten everything down to the ground with these earth staples that will hold the net close to the ground so the peas can climb up. I will need to tie the net to the posts in several spots. Also, there's little barbs on the back of the post that the net will hold to, which helps a lot. So that's another chore for later today, is getting that net up. We're still looking at strawberry blossoms, and it looks like we might have a good crop. I have to get my net out and get it ready because the chipmunks are probably watching them too, and the other creatures that like strawberries as much as I do. So I want to net these, and I found the best netting is green dress netting, just from the fabric store. That seems to work about the best. The bees can still manage to get in and pollinate, but the critters don't have much chance of getting in because it's pretty finely textured. We'll be getting that on the strawberries when we start to see some berries forming. But so far they look really good, and I'm looking forward to a nice strawberry harvest. The spinach is doing well. It's another week or so away from baby spinach harvest. I've set in some Brussels sprouts. These are tiny right now. They'll get fairly tall before they're finished, but we won't be harvesting those until about September, maybe even October. It's time to plant beans, and I've dug my trench, and I'm going to start with some green beans. And you'll notice that I've dug a little deeper to plant beans because they're a larger seed. And I'm going to put those about 1 inch apart down the row. Dropped a few here, so we'll move those down. And then cover them about a 1/2 inch deep. And pat the soil down really well. I have a hormone mixed in with the seed. This is activates the nitrogen producing qualities of legumes, which are beans and peas, and helps them form some nitrogen, which helps them grow. I'll continue planting this row a little later, mark where I stopped. I'll also be planting some yellow beans. These are green beans, and some yellow beans will be planted in this row as well. We can also plant squash now that it's warm enough. And I have some zucchini, and I'm going to plant just 2 hills of zucchini and 2 hills of yellow squash. My problem is I like to plant so many things and I'm running out of space. And I put in a rock, and what I'm going to do is just make a little trench around the rocks. The soil is really soft and nice right now. And then plant 5 or 6 of the seeds around each of the rocks. And again, cover those with about a 1/2 inch of soil. The rock is there so that I know where they're planted. And again, don't plant something else over it. And we'll do the same with another one, and also with the yellow squash, which is very similar. Having them together kind of helps or hurts, depending on your thoughts. The same pests attack both types of squash. And so having them together, if I use some organic type spray on them, I can hit both of them at the same time. If I move them away from each other, they might do better because the pests might only hit one side. So it's up to you where you plant them. I like to plant them together because they're usually harvested together. I have my tomato cages up. My tomatoes are still pretty small, so I'm going to leave those in my shed for a little while longer. My shed has a glass side. It acts as a greenhouse in the spring. It's not heated, so I can't use it that way in the winter, but it works well in the spring to give them a little extra heat, which is what they need right now. So I'll wait another week probably before I put in my tomatoes. I am going to plant my cucumbers around the cucumber trellis here, and I'll plant cucumbers on all 3 sides. And then when they start to come up, we'll put in some strings so that they can climb up. And rather than trailing along the ground, these are kind of tiny, and I don't want them too thick. So maybe 6 or 7 on each side. And again, we'll cover those. With a little less than the beans and squash because they're tinier seeds. These will all be mulched with straw once they come up and I can see where they are. I've already put some mulch around the strawberries and around the garlic plants. Parsley is available here, and this is last year's parsley. Parsley takes a long time to germinate, and by leaving the parsley in the garden over the winter, this is the parsley that was last year's crop, and I can use that until the new parsley is ready. it will come up and go to seed. It's already in some spots looking like it wants to go to seed, and that's its life cycle. I'm going to plant some eggplant in this row, and these are plants I purchased. I didn't grow them myself this year. And getting them out is always the difficulty. And sometimes it's best to just use a pair of scissors and cut the container. Take them all out. And these have roots that need to be broken up a little bit as we put them in. And I'm going to pull the string, and I've made little holes here. And I'll put my little tag here so I know what they are. And I'll just dig down and plant these in the soil. Firm it in well. And I am planting them a little closer than I probably should, but again, I have so many things to plant. I want to put in some flowers as well as vegetables, so my spacing's a little tight. Eggplant is a pretty tender plant, and if we do happen to get some cooler night weather, I will come out with a cover and cover these up with just a light ramie cover. Ramie is a non-woven fabric that can be used to cover crops. And as always, we give them a nice drink of water. I've already put in some celery and some fennel. Fennel's a new crop for me this year. This is the bulbing fennel. I did grow it inside. They're tiny plants now, and I'm hoping that it grows really well. The lettuce that we put in as plants is coming along very nicely, thanks to the rain we've had lately. Fortunately, my garden is pretty well drained, so the rain can drain off. But we want to keep those watered. And I have some of the row left, and that can be used for some flowers a little later. The rhubarb is ready to be picked, and to pick rhubarb, you basically just pull on a leaf and harvest the whole stem. Just pull, and that's it. And then you cut off the leaf. The leaves are not edible. In fact, they are toxic. They contain a lot of oxalic acid. So you can't use rhubarb leaves, but the stems are delicious. And we'll be using some of that in the kitchen a little later. I have rhubarb here. I planted a few more plants that are in various sizes. This is a year old, and that one was just planted. So I will have a row of rhubarb here eventually. I have some in the herb garden, and I also have a plant that I snuck in the back of the flower garden. So we like rhubarb when it's in season, and we'll be taking this in to use in the kitchen. Let's move to the back now. About a month ago, I put a container together just to add some spring color with some pansies and some lettuce starts. And our lettuce is now ready to be harvested, and then we can put in some other summer blooming annuals after I pull the lettuce. So I'll be pulling out the lettuce and harvesting it in the next week or so, and then I'll be ready to put in the summer things that will add some blooms. I generally fill this one with coleus because now that the leaves are on the trees, it's not getting the sun that it needed for the lettuce. It's quite shady, so I'll put in a shady annuals for this garden. Impatiens would work, coleus, any other things that grow well in the shade. This is another pot that is in the garden. And one year I plunked this hosta in the pot, kind of temporarily, and also some of the lamium. And I forgot about it, really. I thought it was a temporary position, and it came back up. So it's been growing in this pot. You can grow some perennials in pots over the winter. They have to be hardy to about 2 zones colder than we are, because of course they're more exposed. But the hosta has been doing fine. Now I'm going to add another one of the canna lilies, and this one has is green leaves and red flowers, and it has 1, 2, 3 bud eyes on it, so it's going to be a 4. There's another one in here. It will be putting up 4 stalks, and I'm just going to bury that down in the pot and hope I remember where it is. And then I'll put in some other annuals around it. Some of the ones I took cuttings from last year, but these will come up and it will get quite tall and add some height to this large pot. One of the rules of thumb, it's not hard and fast, but it's a good guideline, is if you are putting together a pot, you want either to have something that's 2/3 taller, so the pot would be 1/3 and then 2/3 would be plants, or the pot is 2/3 and the plants are 1/3. That seems to be a good proportion when you're putting together different types of arrangements in pots. So it's good to think about that. And this needs some height. I would like it to have height, so the canna will give it height that it needs, hopefully, if all is well. They've come up well here before, but it does need to have it, or else I'd need to just keep it low. Working back into this little area, this is just a little narrow border along a dry stream, and I have shade type plants, some more types of hosta. That's a small one, yellow with a green border. This is Brunera, which is now in bloom throughout my shade garden. It has a heart-shaped leaf. This is the plain type, and it flowers in blue. It looks like little forget-me-nots. And the Japanese fern, and they come in grays and reds. This one happens to be a red. It gets enough sun here, just a little bit, that it has a lovely color right now, kind of a burnished reddish color. This is probably in such a state that it can be divided a little bit and perhaps a piece of it moved elsewhere. Again, more hostas. Hostas come in various sizes, from very large down to very tiny, and everything in between. The leaves can be edged in yellow, have centers of white, be edged in white, dark green, light green. They make a great filler plant for a shade garden because they have such variety. And we'll move down into the shade garden now. A lot of people have trouble with shade. I've heard so many people say, well, I can't grow anything, I have shade. Well, this is shade, and I love shade. It's nice to work in when it's hot because it is shady. And there are a lot of plants that grow in the shade. We started out with the hellebores. They're pretty much finished now, and they're ready to go to seed. And since I have so many that have gone to seed, I will probably come in and deadhead these, take off the seeding bodies so that they don't go to seed. Lamium is a nice ground cover and brightens things up. This is a type of lamium that doesn't spread, or it's lamiastrum, I'm sorry, that doesn't spread. It's Herman's Pride. Again, various hostas. This is a large one. This is going to get quite large, as is the large lime green one in back. This little plant is epimedium. And epimedium has the little fairy bell type blossoms, and then it has lovely little heart-shaped leaves, and a lot of the leaves will have tinges of darker colors, lighter colors, and some red. Spanish bluebells are starting to bloom in here. I have some Spanish bluebells. They're a bulb that will grow in the shade. Ferns of all types add texture. The white plants with the little starry blooms are tiarella, and that too comes in different leaf colors. Some of them have darker colors. This has a darker vein, but some are dark with a lighter vein, and other variations. Bleeding heart, always a nice plant. Many times they do in the summer go dormant, but if they're in the shade, they often stay and you have the foliage all summer. I've put out a pot of impatiens. We grew the impatiens. I believe I did the seeding of those on one of the shows earlier, and they will add some color to this garden throughout. I have more impatiens that are in the shade, and they will be put in various spots in this garden as the bulb foliage dies down. All this was crocuses that were in bloom a month or so ago, and the foliage has to brown in order for them to come back. More Japanese painted fern. This one is not the red, it's a more muted color, kind of an olive color with a little red highlight. And this is hay-scented fern, which is just a little fern that's short and grows extremely well and is a bright green. Again, there are many, many plants that will grow in the shade and many variations of those that do. So don't be afraid of shade, use it to your advantage. Now let's move back by the pond a little bit. Finally got my pond up and running. I have the filter going in the falls. There's a filter within the waterfall area, and also the skimmer pulls off anything that falls in the pond. Being in the shade, a lot of things do fall in the pond, so I need to clean out the skimmer basket every couple days. Right now I'm cleaning it every day to get the water to clear up. It will clear ultimately, but it does take a while. The fish are quite happy, and we've got a few frogs here and there. I don't see any right now. I saw a good sized one here yesterday. I don't put the frogs in, they just come. They come to visit, and every once in a while I even find a turtle that comes to visit. So it's kind of interesting to watch and keep a close eye on what's around the pond. I'm starting to put in water plants. I have elephant ears that will be going in soon, and also some ginger. And I did put in the umbrella plant this morning. As the water warms up, the plants will be nice. Again, more impatiens will add color as the season goes on. Over here, I have a variegated Brunera, the heartleaf plant I showed you earlier, but this one has a white variegation in the leaves. There are several different types. And next to it is a plant called Rogersia, and this has a very bold textured foliage. The bloom is not much, but the foliage is what you plant it for. Again, more astilbe, which will bloom in the shade. This gets a little bit of sun in this area, and more ferns of a different type. These are ostrich ferns, and they're spreading. Some of them probably need to be taken out at this point. This is a European ginger, and it makes it also a nice shiny little ground cover among the hostas. And more of the sweet woodruff, which enjoys the shade. Again, shade is your friend. Don't be afraid if you have shade. You can grow some marvelous plants in the shade. One thing you do have to do is, if you grow hosta, spray it for deer, because the deer really like it. And also, you need to watch for slugs. And slugs will especially attack the young foliage, and I use an iron compound little pellets that I put around it periodically, especially the smaller hosta. The ones with the big leaves that are a little tougher, they don't seem to like as much. But ones like this one, I can see some holes already, so I'll put some of the pellets down in this area, being careful not to get them in the pond. Let's move over to the other side of the garden. I have a few other plants over there. This is a buckeye. There are several different types of buckeyes that you can grow, and this one has a beautiful red bloom. It's in bud right now, and the first few blossoms are just starting to come out, but it will be really stunning in a few days as this blossom comes out. It grows in the part shade. And I have another bleeding heart. I like bleeding hearts very much. And a couple of different ferns. A very tall one in back called Goldie's fern. More hosta. This one's El Capitan. And it gets fairly large as it continues to grow. And this is a maidenhair fern, eastern maidenhair fern, which is a native plant. And it adds yet another texture to the garden. Shade garden is more about texture than bloom. I have some blooms right now. Golden seal, which is a type of ligularia, is now yellow blooms, which I will deadhead because it spreads if I don't. And then the astilbe, again, this will have white plumes later on. Some of the things I've planted and some of the things just grew here. So we have a variety that turns out to be in the garden. The cinnamon ferns just grew. I didn't plant them, they came. Moving up the way, I have a little more color. I have some more Bernera here and there. And this is a hardy geranium. And again, I didn't plant it. It just came. I let it grow. It's a native plant. I did plant the English bluebells that are a little further back. You'll see a swath of blue in there, and they're very nice among the geraniums that have come up. The little ground cover here, and I don't see any in bloom right now, is uvulari. And it has a little yellow bell shape. I think they're done blooming, but it's a ground cover that again just grew, and I let it stay, recognized it and let it stay. The mint green large leaves are pachyphragma, which is another ground cover. There's one right here, and that one I did plant, and to add a little variety again. It looks very nice with the hosta with the yellow edges. It kind of picks up that same color. So I do have a lot of shade, and I do embrace it rather than worry about it. Here are some other shade plants, and this is the geranium again, the hardy geranium. And this is just the wild type. And then I had planted blue columbine, and that's in bloom. I have pink as well, but the blue is currently in bloom. Looks nice with the pink of the geraniums. And we also have some woodland phlox, which is very sweet smelling, and it's blue, and throughout the garden I have clumps of it here and there. And again, it accents the geraniums. This is a cinnamon fern, and this is why they call it a cinnamon fern, because its bloom stalk is kind of cinnamon looking. It looks like it's been dipped in cinnamon. So I think that's where it got its name. And again, this one was not one I planted. It just appeared, and I decided I liked it and left it here. I've added hostas and other plants, but if I see a wild one that I like, I leave it. There are violets throughout the garden as well. In fact, I have to edit out some of the violets because they can get a little too numerous. The English bluebells are bluebells are blue, but they also come in a white version. And I have a patch of white that are a little later blooming. They're in bud right now. This is a native rhododendron. Doesn't look anything like the rhododendrons that we have, and it blooms quite a bit later too. But it's a native plant. I did plant it, but it is a native. And we'll have very fragrant white blooms on that one later. Now let's go inside and see what we can do with some of the things we've picked, like rhubarb, and some of the other things that we can cook up in the kitchen with the herbs. All right, we're in the kitchen, and it's spring, and we have things from the garden that we can work with today. Rhubarb is one of the things we enjoy, and it's at its best in a dessert. And I'm going to make a strawberry rhubarb cobbler today. And I'm going to start with 2 cups of rhubarb, and I'm putting them in a greased pan. And I'm going to just spread that out, and it's been sliced fairly fine. And then I'm using strawberries actually from the freezer. Again, 2 cups that I've thawed and drained. And to that I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of sugar and 1½ tablespoons of cornstarch, which wants to stick. And this will be the thickening for the sauce that's underneath the cake part. I'm preheating my oven to 350 at this time, and I'm going to mix the cornstarch and sugar into the strawberries and put those in a layer over the rhubarb. Strawberry rhubarb pie is kind of a classic, and any strawberry rhubarb dessert is. The sweetness of the strawberries kind of tempers the sourness of the rhubarb, but you still need to add quite a bit of sugar. And then we'll make the cake portion, which is we're going to use a cup of flour, which I've put in the bowl, and 3/4 of a cup of sugar, ¼ teaspoon baking powder, and 1/8 teaspoon of salt. Not very much. And I mixed that around. And then I've melted a 1/4 cup of butter, and I'm going to add, let's see, check my milk, a 1/4 cup of milk, and I want to get an egg out of the refrigerator, which I forgot to get out. And we'll whisk that in with a fork. Kind of like making a muffin. A cobbler is kind of a cross between a cake and a crisp, but it has a batter on top, a cake type batter. And then I'll mix that in until all the dry ingredients have been incorporated. And then we will spread it on top of the fruit. All the batter we can. Then I have some sparkling sugar. You could just use regular sugar, but I happen to have sparkling sugar. So I'm just going to sprinkle the top with a little bit of the sparkling sugar. Give it a nice finish. And put that in a 350-degree oven for about 40 minutes. Perhaps a little longer because my berries were all cold. Probably about 42 minutes. So I'll set my timer. And we'll just let that continue to cook away. I got an Instant Pot for Christmas. It was not something I was really hot to get, but I've really enjoyed it since I've had it. It has been really wonderful. Oddly enough, my grandson, who lives in an apartment in Boston, really loves his Instant Pot, and I think he's the one who encouraged his parents to buy me one for Christmas. So he bought me a recipe book for it, and we've shared our Instant Pot recipes, so something you can do with your grandchildren. Anyway, the Instant Pot is a pressure cooker, but if you are remembering the old-fashioned pressure cookers that often blew their tops and you had food all over the ceiling, it isn't that way. It's a pretty safe way if you follow the directions, and you do need to do that. It's quite safe. It is not as high pressure as the old pressure cookers. In fact, you don't can in it. You cannot can in it. It does not achieve a high enough pressure to can. But pressure causes food to cook at a higher temperature. You can achieve a higher temperature. For instance, water boils under pressure at a higher temperature. So that's the theory behind it. Instant No, it isn't instant. That's kind of a misnomer. Some recipes probably even take a little longer, but it is convenient, and some recipes do work really well with it. And I just came unplugged, which is not good. But you have the ability to do a lot of grains and beans, and to steam things, to make yogurt, and to pressure cook things. And today we're going to use the pressure function and make a broccoli cheese soup. And this is a recipe from Melissa Clark, who is one of the famous chefs. And I'm going to I started out already, to save some time, by sauteing my onions and garlic in a little butter. And now I'm going to melt some butter. I have it on the saute function. And that's the nice thing about it. You can saute something in it and then proceed to cook it under pressure. I guess you could do that in an old-fashioned pressure cooker too. So it's not that different in that respect. But I'm going to melt the butter. And that was about 1½ tablespoons of butter. And I used the other 1½ tablespoons of butter to saute the onions and garlic. Good-sized onion and about 2 cloves of garlic. I got the garlic out of the freezer. If you'll remember, last year's garlic was put in the freezer before it started to grow again. And I took those out, it thawed very quickly, and I was able to do that. And now I'm going to add flour, and that's 1/4 cup of flour. We'll stir that around. And brown it a bit. It's getting brown fairly fast. This will thicken the soup. And then I'll add 1.5 cups of chicken broth or vegetable broth, your choice. And you could certainly, if you wanted to keep it vegetarian, use oil instead of butter. And I'm sauteing this on high. You have a choice of low, medium, and what they call more on my pot. I'm also going to add at this time a pinch of cayenne pepper, a pinch of nutmeg, and about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Add a little extra flavor. And this has started to thicken just a little bit. Perhaps I can hold it up and you can see that it's started to thicken a bit. And I'm going to add back in the sauteed onions and garlic. And a pound of chopped broccoli, stems and florets. And then I'll put the lid on. And I always do this backwards. And set the pressure valve. This is a pressure release valve. And we're going to set pressure cook. We turn it off. And pressure for 5 minutes. Now, this is the part that isn't instant. You would think that 5 minutes, that's not long at all. However, it has to come up to pressure. And it's going to take it a while to do that. This has just told me it's on. And I've got 5 minutes. And I want it on high pressure for 5 minutes. And then we will let it cook away. And while it's cooking and coming up to pressure, I'll do a few other things. I'm going to do something with lilacs. I mentioned that they were in bloom. And what I'm going to do is candy the lilacs. Just like I have done rose petals and violets in the past, you can also, lilac flowers are edible. So what I'm doing is coating them with egg white, which instead of a regular egg, I have used the meringue powder that you can get in a craft store or baking supply store, possibly even some grocery stores. The meringue powder has been pasteurized, dried and pasteurized, and you add water to it and you get the equivalent of an egg. It is an egg product, but it's a safer egg product, and since with this you would be consuming them raw, I feel it's a safer thing to use than a regular egg white. But I use a small artist's brush to dip them. This was 1 teaspoon of the meringue powder and a tablespoon of water. And then I dip them in fine sugar. And then put them on a wax paper and let them dry. After they've dried, probably for about 24 hours, you can put them in a container in the freezer and they'll keep for quite a long time. And they make a lovely little decoration for a small cupcake or a whole cake if you do enough of them. They're a little picky to do, as are violets and rose petals, but you can have your own organic decorations this way. And the very much darker lilacs would probably work even better than these pale lilac ones. I have white lilacs, but I found that white flowers in general tend to discolor over time when dried. So they aren't as successful as the darker colored ones. And I'll just candy a few of these while we wait for our pressure to come up on the pot. That's the non-instant part, bringing the pressure up and then later releasing the pressure. And they both take some time. So you have to figure those into the timing of the recipe. Again, I want to do maybe a few more of these. Dipping doesn't work as well as using a brush. I've tried it. It just doesn't seem to work quite as well. So just dabbing with a brush. I have a brush that I use only for this. Certainly wouldn't paint with it. Now that we've candied some of the lilacs, I'm going to use the lilacs in something else. I'm going to make rhubarb and lilac syrup. And this can be added to soda water as a beverage or poured over ice cream. And in order to make it, I have used about 2 to 3 stalks of rhubarb and a handful of lilac blossoms. And half a cup of sugar and half a cup of water. And we're going to bring that to a boil and then cover it and let it simmer for about 30 minutes. Just simmer away. And this will make a syrup. After it's cooked for 30 minutes, we'll strain it and then store it in the refrigerator to be used. And you'll have this floral effect of the lilacs and the sourness of the rhubarb sweetened with the sugar, and it will make a syrup. But we need the rhubarb to get really tender. Okay, our pressure cooking has finished, and it will now go to keep warm, unless we hit cancel, and it will count down the time that it keeps warm. But what we want to do is an instant release. There are several ways to release the pressure that is built up, and there's a little pin up here that is up when the pressure is high, and it goes down when the pressure is low, and this is the valve that controls it. And if it will be releasing pressure now, and some recipes will tell you to just wait for 5 minutes, which will time down on this L indicator. This calls for instant release, and since it's a soup type dish, what we're going to do is put a towel over this when I turn it this way to release the pressure. And this catches any liquid that comes out. Just a light towel over it will work. And you can hear the steam release. And you want to release it until this little, once it's released a little bit, we can take the towel off. But this keeps the steam and liquid from getting all over your kitchen. If you're doing a dish that is not too liquid, then you don't have to worry about putting a towel over it. But the initial blast does have a lot of liquid in it, so a towel helps. And now our pin has gone down, and we can remove the lid. You can't remove the lid until that happens. It's safe to use. And now we want to remove a few of the broccoli pieces. We're going to have some whole broccoli in our soup, but we're going to puree some of it as well. So I take out just a little to use as a garnish. And then I'm going to add a cup of milk and a cup of grated sharp cheddar cheese. And use the blender. There, we've got it chopped up pretty well. And then we can serve our soup. This makes a cream of broccoli cheese soup. And we'll put a few of the spears on it as a garnish. We can also could add some extra cheese. This gives it a little texture. And sprinkle it perhaps with a little extra cheese. So we put it over here. And we can serve that with some flatbread crackers that I made with rosemary and lemon. They're a very basic recipe. The trick is to roll it very thin. And again, using a pastry cloth and stockinette rolling pin cover allows you to do that. I've also made an herb dip. And the herb dip is very simple. It's cream cheese thinned down with a little milk and a little salt and pepper. And then a tablespoon each of, or 2 tablespoons each of chives, dill, and parsley. And it makes a very nice herb spread. And we have our cobbler, which can come out of the oven. And we'll serve that for dessert. And we have the cobbler with the warm cobbler with the berry sauce, and that would be good with some ice cream or perhaps some whipped cream or maybe just a little yogurt. And we need a spoon to eat our soup and a napkin. Maybe we can decorate the cobbler with a nice little couple of our sugared lilac blooms. They haven't dried yet, but you get the idea. And I'll move my flower arrangement over. Again, using the flowers that are from the garden. And we have azaleas and lilacs and some of the English bluebells. Thank you for joining me for a walk in the garden and a trip through the kitchen. And we'll see you again in a couple of weeks and see how the garden's growing here on NCTV at Norfolk Community Cable Television.